At my wife's company's Christmas party, my wife's CEO held my wife's waist and laughing. He pointed to me and said, "You're just another sad trophy she keeps in the basement, broke, clingy, and forgettable." Everyone laughed, including my wife, except me. I just smiled and said to the CEO, "You are just another loser who was about to lose 95% share of his company." The moment I said those words, his face turned pale. You know that feeling when you're at a party where everyone's pretending to have fun, but you can smell the BS from a mile away? Yeah, that was me tonight, standing in the corner of this ridiculously overpriced ballroom like some kind of wallflower at prom. Sienna's company Christmas party was supposed to be our night out, a chance to actually dress up and pretend we were fancy people for a few hours. Instead, I felt like I was watching a really bad reality show where everyone was trying way too hard to impress each other. The ballroom was decked out like someone had thrown up Christmas all over the place. We're talking chandeliers that probably cost more than most people's cars, ice sculptures that were already melting into expensive puddles, and enough champagne flowing to fill a small swimming pool. The whole place screamed, "Look how successful we are," in that obnoxious way that makes you want to roll your eyes so hard they fall out of your head. I nursed my whiskey, the good stuff, not the cheap crap they usually serve at these corporate shindigs, and watched Sienna work the room. She was in her element, all confident smiles and perfectly timed laughs. My wife could charm the pants off a scarecrow when she wanted to, and tonight she was definitely bringing her A game. Me? I was about as useful as a screen door on a submarine, just standing there trying to look like I belonged. The worst part wasn't the fake conversations about quarterly reports or the pretentious small talk about vacation homes in the Hamptons. No, the worst part was feeling invisible. You ever been in a room full of people and felt completely alone? That was me, drowning in a sea of expensive suits and designer dresses, wondering why I'd bothered putting on my best tie for this circus. Then Carson Vance showed up. If there was ever a guy who looked like he stepped straight out of a douchebag CEO starter pack, it was Carson. Picture this. Perfectly styled hair that probably required more product than a Vegas showgirl. Teeth so white they could blind a pilot. And a smile that screamed, "I'm better than you, and we both know it." The dude wore his arrogance like a cheap cologne, overwhelming and impossible to ignore. I watched him glide across the room like he owned the place, which, technically, he did. Stratos Tech was his baby, his golden goose, his ticket to the kind of wealth that lets you buy politicians for fun. He glad-handed his way through the crowd, dropping names and making promises he probably had no intention of keeping. When he reached Sienna, something inside my chest tightened. Not jealousy, exactly. More like that feeling you get when you see a car accident about to happen in slow motion. He slipped his arm around her waist with the casual confidence of a guy who'd never been told no in his entire privileged life. "Sienna, darling," he said, his voice carrying that fake warmth that made my skin crawl. "You look absolutely stunning tonight. Though I have to ask, where's that husband of yours hiding?" The crowd around them chuckled like he'd just told the funniest joke in the world. Sienna's laugh was bright and musical, the same one that used to make my heart skip a beat when we were dating. Now it just felt like nails on a chalkboard. "Oh, Julian's around here somewhere," she said, her eyes scanning the room until they found me. For a split second, I thought I saw something apologetic in her expression. Then Carson followed her gaze, and his grin turned predatory. "Ah, there he is," Carson announced, his voice booming across the ballroom like he was calling out the winner of some twisted game show. "Ladies and gentlemen, may I present Julian Cross, the man who's mastered the art of being professionally unemployed." The laughter that followed hit me like a slap to the face. These people, Sienna's colleagues, her friends, people I'd smiled at and made small talk with for years, were eating it up like it was the entertainment portion of the evening. But Carson wasn't done. Oh no, he was just getting warmed up. He tightened his grip on Sienna's waist, pulling her closer like she was some kind of prize he'd won at a county fair. "You know what Julian is," he continued, his voice dripping with mock affection. "He's Sienna's little basement trophy. You know, the kind of guy who stays home, watches TV, and lives off his successful wife's hard work. Broke, clingy, and completely forgettable." The room erupted. People were practically falling over themselves laughing. Some woman in a sequin dress actually snorted champagne through her nose. Even the waiters were trying to hide their grins behind their trays. And then there was Sienna, my wife. The woman who'd promised to love and honor me, who'd sworn to have my back through thick and thin, threw her head back and laughed like Carson had just delivered the punchline of the century. Her laughter was the loudest of all, bright and clear and absolutely devastating. The room spun a little. Not from the whiskey. I'd only had one drink, but from the sheer, crushing weight of betrayal. These people didn't know me. They didn't know what I'd done, what I'd built, what I'd sacrificed. But Sienna did. Or at least, she should have. The laughter started to die down, and Carson basked in the attention like a sunflower turning toward the light. He was probably already planning his next zinger, ready to milk this moment for all it was worth. That's when I decided I'd heard enough. I set my glass down on the nearest table. Crystal, of course, because Carson wouldn't know class if it bit him on his surgically enhanced ass, and walked toward the center of the room. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, their laughter fading into confused murmurs. Carson's grin faltered when he saw me approaching. Good. I wanted him off balance. I stopped directly in front of him, close enough that I could smell his expensive cologne and the desperation underneath it. The room was dead silent now, everyone waiting to see what the basement trophy was going to do. I looked Carson straight in his artificially blue eyes and smiled. Not a bitter smile or an angry one, just calm, confident, and completely unshakable. You know what, Carson? I said, my voice carrying clearly through the silent ballroom. You're absolutely right. I am just a guy who's been hanging around in the basement. His grin returned, triumphant. He thought he'd won. But here's the thing about basements, I continued, my smile never wavering. That's where you keep all the really valuable stuff. And you, my friend, are just another loser who's about to lose 95% of his company. Carson's face went white. Not pale, not flushed. White as fresh snow, white as bleached bone, white as the lies he'd been telling himself about who really held the power in this room. The silence stretched on forever, and I walked away. Walking out of that ballroom felt like stepping out of a fever dream and into reality. The cool December air hit my face like a wake-up call, and for the first time all evening, I could actually breathe. Behind me, I could hear the stunned silence I'd left in my wake slowly giving way to confused chatter. Good. Let them choke on their champagne and expensive words. My footsteps echoed across the marble floor of the hotel lobby. Each click of my dress, shoes marking the distance between who they thought I was and who I really was. The doorman nodded as I passed, probably relieved to see someone leaving the pretentious circus upstairs. I didn't blame him. If I had to watch rich people play dress-up and backstab each other for a living, I'd probably develop a drinking problem. Julian, wait. And there it was, the sound of designer heels clicking frantically across marble, accompanied by the rustling of an expensive dress. Sienna was chasing after me like some kind of rom-com heroine, except this wasn't cute or romantic. This was desperate damage control. I didn't slow down. Why should I? She'd had her chance to stand up for me up there, and instead she'd chosen to laugh along with the crowd like I was some kind of punchline. Now she wanted to talk? Now she cared about my feelings? Julian, please stop. Her voice was getting breathless, probably because running in those ridiculous heels was like trying to sprint in stilts. Part of me wanted to keep walking, to let her stumble after me in her fancy dress while I disappeared into the night like some mysterious stranger from a movie. But the other part of me, the part that still remembered why I'd fallen for her in the first place, made me stop. I turned around slowly, giving her time to catch up. She was slightly out of breath, her perfect hair showing the first signs of coming undone. Her cheeks were flushed, whether from embarrassment or exertion, I couldn't tell. Maybe both. What the hell was that supposed to mean? She demanded, her eyes flashing with a mixture of confusion and anger. What you said to Carson, about him losing his company. Julian, that doesn't make any sense. You can't just threaten people like that. I had to laugh. Not a bitter laugh this time, but genuine amusement at the sheer absurdity of the situation. Here was my wife, defending the man who'd just humiliated me in front of a room full of people. The same man who'd called me a broke, clingy basement trophy while she laughed along. Threaten him, I said, shaking my head. Sienna, that wasn't a threat. That was a promise. She stared at me like I'd just told her I was secretly an alien from Mars. Julian, you're scaring me. You're talking crazy. Carson owned Stratos Tech. He built that company from the ground up. You can't just... Can't what? I interrupted, my voice staying perfectly calm despite the storm brewing inside my chest. Can't tell the truth? Can't defend myself when your boss decides to turn me into his personal punching bag for the evening's entertainment? That's not what happened, she protested, but her voice lacked conviction. We both knew exactly what had happened up there. Really? I stepped closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to look at me. Because from where I was standing, it looked like my wife found it absolutely hilarious when another man called me a pathetic loser who lives off her success. The fight went out of her eyes for a moment, replaced by something that might have been guilt. But then her defensive walls went back up, and she crossed her arms like she was protecting herself from my words. "You're being ridiculous," she said, but she couldn't meet my eyes when she said it. "It was just a joke, Julian. Carson was just being Carson. You know how he is at these things." "Yeah, I do know how he is," I said quietly. "The question is, do you know how I am?" She frowned, clearly confused by the question. What's that supposed to mean? And there it was, the million-dollar question that proved everything I'd suspected for years. My own wife didn't know who I was. She didn't know what I'd done, what I'd built, what I was capable of. To her, I was exactly what Carson had said, a basement trophy, a kept man, a nobody who'd gotten lucky enough to marry above his station. "It means," I said, turning back toward the parking garage, "that you're about to find out." "Julian, don't walk away from me." Her heels clicked frantically as she hurried to keep up. "I deserve an explanation. If you know something about Carson's company, if you're planning something, you deserve an explanation." I stopped so suddenly she almost crashed into me. "Sienna, 5 minutes ago you were laughing along while your boss made me the entertainment for the evening. Now you want explanations." Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. She knew I was right, but her pride wouldn't let her admit it. "I wasn't laughing at you," she said weakly. It was awkward, Julian. I didn't know what to do." "You didn't know what to do," I repeated slowly, letting the words hang in the air between us. "When someone insults your husband, humiliates him in front of dozens of people, you didn't know what to do except laugh along. That's not fair." "Fair?" I shook my head. "You want to talk about fair? Fair would have been you telling Carson to shut his mouth instead of encouraging him. Fair would have been you walking out with me instead of staying to enjoy the show. Fair would have been you knowing who you married instead of treating me like some kind of embarrassing secret." We'd reached my car, a modest sedan that suddenly looked like a rust bucket next to all the BMWs and Mercedes in the garage. Sienna probably saw it as proof of what Carson had said about me being broke. She had no idea that I could have bought and sold half the cars in that garage without making a dent in my portfolio. "Julian, please," she said, her voice softer now, almost pleading. "I'm sorry. I should have defended you. I know that. But this thing with Carson, whatever you're planning, it's going to hurt both of us. My career, our future. Our future." I unlocked the car and opened the driver's side door. "Sienna, after tonight, I'm not even sure we have a present, let alone a future." Her face went pale. "You don't mean that." I looked at her for a long moment, really looked at her. The woman I'd married, the woman I'd thought I'd spend the rest of my life with. She was beautiful, successful, ambitious. Everything I'd thought I wanted in a partner. But she didn't know me. After all these years together, she had no idea who I really was. "You laughed at me," I said quietly. "In front of all those people, you laughed at me like I was nothing. Like I was exactly what he said I was." "I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't fix this, Sienna." I got into the car and started the engine. "But don't worry. By tomorrow morning, you'll understand exactly what Carson meant when his face went white." I backed out of the parking space, leaving her standing there in her designer dress and uncomfortable shoes, looking lost and confused in the fluorescent lighting of the garage. She still didn't get it. She thought I was unemployed, that I lived off her salary, that I was some kind of house husband playing video games in our basement while she climbed the corporate ladder. She had no idea that the company paying her salary, the company Carson thought he owned, the company that had made them all rich, it was mine. And tomorrow, they were all going to remember why ghosts are so dangerous. Because nobody sees them coming. The drive home was therapeutic in that twisted way that only pure, unadulterated rage can be. I took the long way, letting the December night air cool my head while my hands gripped the steering wheel like I was trying to choke the life out of it. The radio was playing some sappy Christmas song about love and togetherness, perfect soundtrack for the dumpster fire my marriage had just become. I switched it off. Tonight wasn't about holiday cheer and warm, fuzzy feelings. Tonight was about settling scores. Our house looked exactly the same as when I'd left it 3 hours ago, but somehow everything felt different. The perfectly manicured lawn, the tasteful holiday lights Sienna had insisted on hanging, the expensive cars in the driveway. It all felt like a stage set for a play I was no longer interested in performing. I sat in the car for a moment, staring at the house we'd bought together, wondering how long it would take before she realized that the mortgage payments came from accounts she'd never seen. Inside, the silence was deafening. No Sienna clicking around in her heels, no sound of her chattering on the phone with her work friends, no background noise from whatever reality TV show she was binge-watching that week. Just me, the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, and the weight of 5 years' worth of carefully constructed lies finally coming home to roost. I loosened my tie, the expensive one Sienna had picked out for me, claiming it made me look presentable, and headed straight for my office. Not the fancy home office upstairs that Sienna used for her important work calls, but the smaller room in the basement that everyone assumed was where I played video games and pretended to be busy. The irony wasn't lost on me. Carson had called me a basement trophy, and technically, he wasn't wrong. All my most valuable stuff really was in the basement. The office looked exactly like what you'd expect from a guy who supposedly didn't work. A beat-up desk I'd bought at a garage sale, a gaming chair that had seen better days, a couple of monitors that most people would assume were for entertainment purposes. What they couldn't see was that those gaming monitors were connected to servers worth more than most people's annual salaries, running algorithms that had made me rich enough to buy Carson's company as a hobby. But tonight wasn't about the computers or the trading algorithms or the crypto wallets that held enough digital currency to fund a small country's infrastructure. Tonight was about the old-fashioned, analog proof that would turn Carson's world upside down and inside out. I walked over to the bookshelf, the one filled with technical manuals and programming guides that Sienna always complained made the room look nerdy. She had no idea that half those books were hollowed out, containing backup drives and encrypted storage devices that held the keys to more wealth than she could imagine. But I wasn't after the digital stuff tonight. The bookshelf itself was the real treasure. I pulled out 3 specific books: Advanced Database Management, Network Security Protocols, and Corporate Finance for Dummies. The last one always made me chuckle. If anyone had bothered to actually look at it, they might have wondered why a supposedly unemployed guy owned a book about corporate finance. But nobody ever looked. People see what they expect to see, and they expected to see a loser's collection of random books. The books triggered a mechanism I'd had installed when we first moved in. The entire middle section of the bookshelf swung inward on hidden hinges, revealing a wall safe that would have made a Swiss banker jealous. Biometric scanner, keypad, the works. This wasn't some Home Depot special you could crack with a crowbar and bad attitude. This was industrial-grade security for industrial-grade secrets. I pressed my thumb to the scanner, punched in a code that included Sienna's birthday. Yeah, I'm sentimental like that, and listened to the satisfying chunk of multiple deadbolts retracting. The safe doors swung open, revealing the paper trail that would turn tonight's humiliation into tomorrow's revenge. The documents were organized in labeled folders, each one representing a different phase of my carefully orchestrated disappearing act. Novagrid's sale contained the paperwork from when I'd sold my first company to a tech conglomerate for more money than most people see in 10 lifetimes. Investment Portfolio held the records of how I'd turned that money into even more money through a combination of smart investments, lucky breaks, and an almost supernatural ability to spot trends before they became obvious. But the folder I was really after was labeled Stratos Tech Acquisition. Inside was the complete paper trail of how I'd quietly, methodically, and completely legally bought 95% of Carson's company over the course of 3 years. Shell companies, dummy corporations, offshore investment funds. I'd used every trick in the book to hide my identity while systematically purchasing shares from anyone willing to sell. The beautiful thing about Carson was that he was so arrogant, so convinced of his own brilliance, that he'd never bothered to properly investigate who was buying up his company. He'd been too busy playing CEO, making speeches, and apparently insulting people's husbands at Christmas parties to notice that someone was quietly pulling the rug out from under his feet. I spread the documents across my desk like I was planning a military campaign. The original merger documents from when Carson thought he was selling a small stake to raise capital. The trust agreements that technically made me the silent partner while letting him keep the CEO title. The board resolutions that gave me ultimate decision-making power whenever I chose to exercise it. My personal favorite was the clause buried on page 47 of the main contract, the one that allowed me to remove any executive for conduct detrimental to company interests. Carson's lawyer had probably figured it was standard boilerplate language. Carson himself had definitely never read that far. Big mistake. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I was looking for, Priya Lang. My lawyer, my friend, and the only person who knew exactly how rich and powerful I really was. She'd been with me since the early days of Novagrid, back when I was just another programmer with big dreams and bigger ambitions. She'd helped me navigate the sale, the investments, and the elaborate shell game that had made me the ghost owner of Stratos Tech. It was late. Almost midnight. But Priya was a night owl, and this was the kind of call she'd been expecting for years. She answered on the second ring. Well. Julian Cross finally ready to come out of the shadows. It's time, I said, my voice steadier than it had been all evening. What finally pushed you over the edge? She asked, and I could hear the amusement in her voice. Let me guess. Carson said something stupid at a party? Something like that. And Sienna? I looked at the wedding photo on my desk. The happy couple who thought they knew each other, who thought they had their whole lives figured out. Sienna laughed. There was a long pause. Priya had met Sienna, had watched our relationship develop, had probably seen this coming from a mile away. She was too professional to say, I told you so, but I could feel it in the silence. All right, she said finally. No more Mr. Nice Guy. No more hiding in the basement. Tomorrow, we remind everyone why they should be careful about making jokes at other people's expense. No more shadows, I agreed. This is going to get messy, Julian. Are you sure you're ready for the fallout? I looked at the contracts spread across my desk, then at the empty house around me, then at the wedding ring on my finger that suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Priya, I said, I've been ready for this moment for 5 years. It's time everyone learned that the quiet guy in the corner isn't always the one you should ignore. Then let's burn it all down. I hung up and carefully returned the documents to their folders, but I left the safe open. Tomorrow, I wouldn't need to hide anymore. Carson wanted to call me a basement trophy? Fine. But he was about to learn that sometimes the trophy is worth more than everything else combined. Morning came way too early, but I was already awake. Hell, I'd been awake since about 4 a.m., sitting in my kitchen with a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago, staring out the window and watching the world wake up. Funny how everything looks different when you're about to blow up someone's life. The sunrise seemed brighter, the birds sounded happier, and even my neighbor's ugly-ass lawn gnome looked like it was smiling at me. Sienna had come home around 2 in the morning, probably after spending hours at some all-night diner with her work friends, trying to figure out what the hell had happened at the party. I'd heard her heels clicking across the hardwood floor, heard her pause outside my office door like she was thinking about knocking, then heard her trudge upstairs to what I was pretty sure would be the guest bedroom. Smart move. I wasn't in the mood for round 2 of Julian's having a breakdown. By 7 a.m., I was showered, dressed in my best, I'm about to ruin someone's day outfit. Dark suit, red tie, shoes that could cut glass, and ready to watch Carson's world come crashing down around his perfectly styled ears. Priya had texted me at 5:30, papers filed, audit approved. May God have mercy on his soul, because we won't. I love that woman. Not in a romantic way. She was happily married to a tax attorney who could make the IRS cry, but in the way you love a samurai who's about to help you commit corporate seppuku on your enemies. Stratos Tech's headquarters looked exactly like what you'd expect from a company run by a guy who thought he was the next Steve Jobs. All glass and steel and pretentious architecture that screamed, we're innovative, without actually innovating anything. I'd been in the building exactly 3 times since I'd started buying up shares. Always a Sienna's +1 at some boring corporate function. Always treated like the unemployed husband who was lucky to be there. Today was going to be different. I didn't go through the main entrance. Why would I? Instead, I headed straight for the executive parking garage, where my keycard, the one I'd had made years ago but never used, got me past security like I belonged there. Which, technically I did. I own the damn place. The elevator ride to the 15th floor was smooth and quiet, giving me time to think about what Carson was probably doing right about now. If I knew him, and unfortunately, I did. He was sitting in his corner office with the view of the city, drinking his overpriced organic coffee and reading reports about how brilliant he was. He probably hadn't given last night's party another thought. Guys like Carson never did. They dropped their little verbal bombs, enjoyed the explosion, then moved on to the next target without ever considering that someone might drop a bigger bomb right back. The elevator doors opened with a soft ding, and I stepped into the executive suite like I owned the place. Because, again, I did. The first person I saw was Janet Morrison, Carson's assistant and the unofficial keeper of all Stratos Tech gossip. She was about 50, had been with the company since before Carson took over, and had the kind of poker face that made her dangerous at the company Christmas parties. She looked up from her computer as I approached, and I could see the exact moment she recognized me. "Mr. Cross?" she said, confusion written all over her face. "I'm sorry, but Mr. Vance isn't expecting." "That's okay, Janet," I said with a smile that was probably a little too cheerful for 8 in the morning. "He's not expecting a lot of things today." Before she could respond, I heard the sound of multiple pairs of expensive shoes clicking across marble floors. Priya appeared around the corner, followed by 2 guys in suits who looked like they ate corporate malfeasance for breakfast and asked for seconds. The audit team had arrived. "Good morning, Mr. Cross," Priya said, her voice carrying just enough volume that everyone in the vicinity could hear. "I trust you're ready for today's meeting?" "Absolutely," I replied, still wearing that probably too cheerful smile. "Is Mr. Vance available?" Janet looked back and forth between us like she was watching a tennis match, trying to figure out what the hell was happening. I can check if he's free." "Oh, don't bother," Priya said, pulling out a manila folder thick enough to choke a horse. "This is an official audit notice. Mr. Vance's availability is no longer really his choice." The color drained from Janet's face. She'd been around corporate America long enough to know that when lawyers showed up with audit teams, somebody was about to have a very bad day. "Audit?" she stammered. "I don't understand." "Who authorized?" "The primary shareholder," I said simply. And there it was. The moment when Janet Morrison, who knew every secret and scandal in the building, who had probably fielded 1,000 calls from board members and investors over the years, realized that she had no idea who the primary shareholder actually was. I'll let Mr. Vance know you're here," she said weakly, reaching for her phone. "You do that," Priya said. "And while you're at it, you might want to let him know that we'll be examining all executive compensation packages, personal use of corporate resources, and any irregularities in his business practices over the past 5 years." Through the glass walls of Carson's office, I could see him on a phone call, gesturing wildly with his free hand like he was conducting an orchestra. He looked confident, relaxed, completely unaware that his world was about to get turned inside out. My phone buzzed. Text message from an unknown number, but I knew who it was before I even looked. "Julian, please call me. We need to talk about last night." "Sienna." I showed the message to Priya, who read it and raised an eyebrow. "Timing," she said dryly. "Yeah, well, she had her chance to talk last night," I replied, sliding the phone back into my pocket. Right about the time she was laughing at her husband getting humiliated. Should we wait for her to get here? This is going to affect her too. I thought about that for a moment. Sienna worked in marketing, 3 floors down from the executive suite. She was probably at her desk right now, drinking her skinny latte and trying to pretend last night never happened. When the audit hit, when Carson got fired, when the whole house of cards came tumbling down, her job would probably be safe. I wasn't vindictive enough to destroy innocent people just because my marriage was circling the drain. But I also wasn't about to put this on hold just to spare her feelings. "She made her choice," I said. "Now she gets to live with the consequences." Janet hung up her phone and looked at us with the expression of someone who'd just been asked to schedule her own execution. "Mr. Vance will see you now," she said quietly. I could see Carson through the glass walls, straightening his tie and putting on his game face. He probably thought this was just another meeting, another chance to charm and schmooze his way through whatever minor inconvenience had showed up at his door. He had no idea that the minor inconvenience owned him. "After you," Priya said, gesturing toward Carson's office. As we walked toward the door, I caught sight of another familiar face in the hallway. Layla Chun, head of software development and the smartest person in the building that nobody ever listened to. She was carrying a tablet and a coffee cup, probably heading to another meeting where Carson would ignore her suggestions and take credit for her ideas. Our eyes met for just a moment, and I saw something there. Recognition, maybe, or curiosity. She'd always been sharp enough to notice things other people missed. I made a mental note to talk to her later. After all, every kingdom needed a new ruler when the old king got overthrown. And Carson Vance's reign was about to come to a very abrupt end. Carson's office was exactly what you'd expect from a guy who thought he was the king of Silicon Valley. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a desk the size of a small aircraft carrier, and enough awards and trophies scattered around to make you think he'd won the Nobel Prize for being awesome. The whole place screamed, "Look how successful I am," in that desperate way that always made me wonder who he was trying to convince. He was standing behind his desk when we walked in, wearing what I like to call his CEO power pose, shoulders back, chin up, fake smile cranked to 11. The guy probably practiced that look in the mirror every morning while telling himself he was God's gift to the tech industry. "Julian," he said, his voice booming with fake enthusiasm. What a pleasant surprise. Though I have to say, after last night's interesting conversation, I wasn't expecting to see you here so soon. I could see the sweat starting to form on his forehead despite the confident act. "Good. Let him squirm." "Carson," I replied, my voice steady as a rock. I figured it was time we had a proper chat about business. His eyes flicked to Priya and the audit team behind me, and his smile faltered just a bit. "Business? Julian, I hate to break it to you, but you don't exactly have any business here. This is my company." "Funny you should mention that," Priya said, stepping forward and dropping that thick manila folder on his pristine desk with a satisfying thunk. "We're actually here to discuss exactly whose company this is." Carson's face went from confident to confused to slightly panicked in about 3 seconds flat. It was like watching a car accident in slow motion, except way more entertaining. "I'm sorry, but who are you people?" he asked, his voice climbing about half an octave higher than usual. "Priya Lang, attorney for Mr. Cross," she said, flipping open the folder and spreading documents across his desk like she was dealing cards. "These gentlemen are certified public accountants, and we're here to conduct a comprehensive audit of Stratos Tech's financial practices." "Audit?" Carson's voice cracked like a 13-year-old kid asking someone to prom. "On whose authority? You can't just walk into my office and demand." "Actually, we can," I interrupted, picking up one of the documents and holding it where he could see it. "See, Carson, here's the thing you never bothered to learn about your own company. I own 95% of it." The silence that followed was absolutely beautiful. Carson's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. His face went through about 17 different shades of white, and I swear I could actually hear his brain trying to process what I'd just told him. That's impossible," he stammered. "I built this company. I own this company. I'm the CEO. You're the CEO because I let you be the CEO," I said, sitting down in one of his expensive leather chairs and making myself comfortable. But that's about to change. Priya had finished spreading out the paperwork, and it looked like a corporate crime scene. Share certificates, transfer documents, voting trusts, merger agreements. 5 years worth of carefully orchestrated financial maneuvering that had turned Carson's company into my company without him even noticing. "This is insane," Carson said, grabbing one of the documents and staring at it like it might suddenly change into something that made sense. "These can't be real. Julian doesn't have this kind of money. He's unemployed. He lives in his wife's basement." "Actually," I said, standing up and straightening my tie, "I'm a retired tech entrepreneur who sold his previous company for more money than you've made in your entire career. But thanks for playing." One of the audit guys, a thin, serious-looking dude who probably dreamed about balance sheets, stepped forward and pointed to a section of the documents. "Mr. Vance, these share transfer records clearly show that various investment entities controlled by Mr. Cross have been systematically acquiring Stratos Tech stock over the past 3 years. The transactions are all legitimate and properly documented." Carson sank into his chair like someone had just told him Santa Claus wasn't real and the Easter Bunny was a fraud. But how? Why? I never authorized any of this." "That's the beautiful thing about public companies, Carson," I said. You don't get to authorize who buys your stock. People with money buy shares, and eventually, if they're smart and patient enough, they end up owning the whole damn thing. This is a hostile takeover, he sputtered, finally finding his voice again. This is corporate sabotage. I'll sue you. You'll what? Priya interrupted, her voice sharp enough to cut steel. Sue the majority shareholder for exercising his legal rights? Good luck with that strategy. Carson's face was cycling through colors like a broken traffic light, red with anger, white with shock, green around the gills with nausea. I was starting to feel a little sorry for the guy. Almost. Then I remembered him calling me a basement trophy while my wife laughed along, and the sympathy evaporated like morning dew. Here's what's going to happen, I said, leaning forward and looking him straight in the eye. Effective immediately, you're fired as CEO of Stratostech. Your corporate credit cards are canceled, your company car goes back to the fleet, and that corner office you're so proud of? Someone else's problem now. You can't do this, he shouted, jumping to his feet like his chair was on fire. The board will never approve this. I have contracts. I have rights. The board will approve whatever I tell them to approve, I said calmly. As for your contracts, well, I'm sure Priya would be happy to explain that conduct detrimental to company interests clause you never bothered to read. Priya smiled like a shark who'd just smelled blood in the water. Page 47, subsection C. Insulting and humiliating business partners or their family members at public events definitely qualifies as detrimental conduct. Carson's face went from traffic light colors to straight-up ash gray. Business partners? Julian's not a business partner. He's just the guy who owns your company. I finished. The guy you decided to humiliate at a Christmas party for cheap laughs. The guy whose wife you convinced to laugh along while you turned him into a punchline. For the first time since we'd walked into his office, Carson looked genuinely scared. Not angry or confused, but actually frightened. It was finally sinking in that this wasn't some elaborate prank or misunderstanding. This was real, and his perfect little kingdom was crumbling around him. Julian, he said, his voice suddenly small and pleading. Look, maybe I was out of line last night. Maybe I said some things I shouldn't have. We can work this out, right? We can come to some kind of arrangement. I stood up and walked around his desk, stopping directly in front of him. He was sweating openly now, his perfect hair starting to wilt, his expensive suit looking rumpled and desperate. Carson, I said quietly, you called me a broke, clingy, forgettable basement trophy in front of a room full of people. You made my wife laugh at me. You turned my marriage into your entertainment for the evening. He opened his mouth to say something, probably another apology or excuse, but I held up my hand to stop him. So no, we can't work this out. And no, we can't come to an arrangement. You're done. I turned to Priya, who was already closing up the folder and preparing to deliver the final blow. Oh, and Carson? I said, pausing at the door. I'm naming Layla Chun as interim CEO. You know, the woman whose ideas you've been stealing for years? The one you never thought was smart enough to run things. His face went completely white. Layla? But she's just a programmer. She's a programmer who actually understands technology, treats people with respect, and has never once called anyone a basement trophy, I said. Funny how that works out. As we walked out of his office, I could hear him behind us, frantically dialing numbers on his phone, probably trying to call board members or lawyers or anyone who might be able to save his ass. Good luck with that, I thought. After all, it's hard to fight a ghost when you finally realize he's been holding all the cards the entire time. If I thought the drive home after the Christmas party was therapeutic, the drive home after firing Carson was like winning the lottery, curing cancer, and discovering the meaning of life all rolled into one beautiful, satisfying package. I took the scenic route again, windows down despite the December chill, letting the cold air wash over me while I processed what had just happened. Carson Vance. The man who'd called me a basement trophy, who'd humiliated me in front of dozens of people, who'd convinced my own wife to laugh at me, was probably sitting in his now former office right about now, staring at the papers that proved he'd never really owned anything. The mental image of his face when reality finally sank in was going to keep me warm for years. My phone had been buzzing nonstop since I'd left Stratostech. Text messages, missed calls, voicemails. The corporate gossip mill was working overtime, and apparently everyone wanted to talk to the mysterious new owner who'd just dropped a nuclear bomb on their workplace. I ignored all of it. There'd be time for damage control and PR later. Right now, I just wanted to enjoy the silence before the storm hit my house. Because oh boy, was there going to be a storm. I pulled into our driveway around 6 p.m., and I could see Sienna's car already there. The lights were on in the living room, kitchen, and what looked like every other room in the house. Either she was throwing a party, or she was pacing around like a caged tiger, working herself into the kind of fury that could peel paint off walls. Given that her boss had just been fired by her supposedly unemployed husband, I was betting on option 2. The front door wasn't locked, probably because Sienna was too wound up to remember basic security, so I walked into my own house like I was entering a war zone. The silence was different from last night. Last night had been shocked, confused silence. Tonight was the kind of silence that comes right before someone starts throwing expensive dishes at your head. Julian. Her voice came from the living room, and it had that fake calm quality that every married man learns to recognize as the vocal equivalent of a tornado siren. Yeah, it's me. I called back, hanging up my coat and loosening my tie. No point in pretending this was going to be a pleasant conversation. I found her in the living room, still wearing the same clothes she'd worn to work that morning, but her perfect hair was messed up like she'd been running her hands through it, and her makeup was slightly smudged around the eyes. She was standing by the window, staring out at the street like she expected a parade of angry board members to come marching up our driveway. "Sit down," she said without turning around. "I think I'll stand," I replied, crossing my arms and leaning against the doorframe. If this was going to be a fight, I wanted to be ready to move. She spun around, and I could see the full extent of her fury written across her face. Her eyes were bright with anger, her cheeks were flushed, and she was gripping her phone so tightly I was surprised the screen hadn't cracked. "What the hell did you do?" she demanded, her voice climbing toward that pitch that makes dogs whimper and neighbors call the cops. "I had a meeting," I said calmly. "A very productive meeting." "A meeting?" She took a step toward me, and I could see her hands shaking with rage. "Julian, you got Carson fired. You somehow took over his company. My phone has been ringing nonstop for 6 hours with people asking me what the hell is going on. And what did you tell them?" "I told them I had no idea," she screamed, throwing her phone onto the couch hard enough that it bounced twice. "Because I don't. I don't know anything about you. I don't know where you got the money. I don't know how you bought a company. I don't know why you did it. And I sure as hell don't know why you decided to destroy my career in the process." There it was. The real issue. Not that I'd been humiliated and she'd laughed along. Not that her boss had called me a pathetic loser and she'd found it hilarious. Her career. Her image. Her standing in the corporate world. "Your career," I repeated slowly. "That's what you're worried about." "Your career. Of course that's what I'm worried about." She started pacing back and forth like she was trying to wear a hole in the hardwood floor. "Do you have any idea how this looks? My husband, who everyone thinks is unemployed, just fired my boss and took over the company. People are going to think I was in on it. They're going to think I've been lying to them for years." "You have been lying to them for years," I said quietly. She stopped pacing and stared at me. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means you've been telling everyone that your husband is a loser who lives off your success, when the truth is that your success comes from the company I own." Her mouth fell open. "That's not. I never said you were a loser." "Really?" I pushed off from the doorframe and took a step toward her. "Because last night, when Carson called me a broke, clingy, forgettable basement trophy, you didn't exactly rush to defend me. That was different." "No, Sienna. That was honest. For the first time in our marriage, you were completely honest about how you see me." She shook her head violently, like she could physically reject what I was saying. "You're being ridiculous." I was caught off guard. It was awkward. I didn't know what to say. "You knew exactly what to say," I replied, my voice getting harder. "You said nothing, and then you laughed. It was just a joke." "A joke?" I felt my own anger starting to rise, the calm control I'd maintained all day finally beginning to crack. "Sienna, he called me a nobody in front of a room full of people. He said I was pathetic and forgettable. He made me the entertainment for the evening, and you thought it was funny. I was trying to keep the peace." "Bullshit." The word came out sharper than I'd intended, and she flinched like I'd slapped her. "You were trying to keep your position. You were trying to make sure your boss still liked you, even if it meant throwing your husband under the bus." Tears started forming in her eyes, but I wasn't in the mood to be moved by them. Julian, please. You're scaring me. This isn't like you. You don't do things like this. You don't fight back. And there it was. The truth, she didn't even realize she'd spoken. You're right, I said, sitting down on the couch and looking at her with something that might have been sadness. The Julian you married doesn't fight back. He sits quietly in corners, lets people insult him, and pretends it doesn't hurt when his own wife laughs along. I picked up her phone from where she'd thrown it and held it out to her. But that Julian died last night, Sienna. Right around the time you decided that keeping your boss happy was more important than defending your husband. She took the phone with shaking hands. So what happens now? You've embarrassed me in front of everyone I work with. You've made me look like a fool or a liar or both. What's your next move in this little revenge fantasy? I stood up and walked toward the stairs, pausing at the bottom step. This isn't revenge, Sienna. This is me finally being honest about who I am and what I'm capable of. And what about us? Her voice was small now, almost childlike. What about our marriage? I looked at her for a long moment, really looked at her. The woman I'd fallen in love with, the woman I'd thought I'd spend my life with, the woman who'd laughed when someone called me a basement trophy. I don't know, I said honestly. I guess that depends on whether you can learn to respect the man you actually married, instead of the man you thought you could manage. I started up the stairs, but her voice stopped me. Julian, wait. Please. I'm sorry. I should have defended you. I know that. But this isn't the way to handle it. You're hurting innocent people. You're destroying. I'm not destroying anything, I said without turning around. I'm building something better, with people who actually deserve it. People like Layla, who's been doing Carson's job for years without getting any credit. And what about me? She whispered. I turned around and looked down at her from the top of the stairs. She looked so small standing there in our living room, surrounded by all the expensive things we'd bought together, holding her phone like it was the last connection to the life she'd thought she understood. That's up to you, I said. You can learn who you actually married, or you can keep pretending I'm the man you thought you could keep in the basement. But either way, I'm done being your trophy. I went into our bedroom, closed the door, and for the first time in years, I locked it. Outside, I could hear her crying. But for the first time since last night, I wasn't the one who felt like breaking. 3 weeks later, Stratos Tech looked like a completely different company. Hell, it practically was a completely different company. Walking through the halls that used to echo with the sound of stressed-out employees kissing Carson's ass, I now heard something I'd never experienced there before: actual laughter. People talking about ideas instead of politics. The sound of productivity instead of panic. Layla Chun had turned out to be everything I'd hoped for, and then some. Where Carson had ruled through fear and micromanagement, Layla led through competence and respect. She didn't need to scream at people to get results. She just had to show them that their work actually mattered, and suddenly everyone was busting their asses to prove they belonged there. "Morning, Mr. Cross," she said as I walked into what used to be Carson's corner office. She'd completely redecorated the place, trading his pretentious awards and ego wall for whiteboards covered in project timelines and actual engineering diagrams. The massive desk had been replaced with a standing workstation surrounded by comfortable chairs where people could actually collaborate instead of being lectured. "Just Julian," I said for probably the 100th time since she'd taken over. "And good morning to you too, CEO Chen." She grinned at that. Layla had this infectious smile that made everyone around her want to work harder, be better, actually give a damn about what they were doing. It was the complete opposite of Carson's fake corporate charm. "The Q4 numbers came in," she said, sliding a tablet across her desk. "Revenue's up 18% from last quarter, employee satisfaction scores are through the roof, and we just landed 3 new contracts that Carson had been fumbling for months." I scrolled through the data, shaking my head in amazement. How the hell did Carson keep this company from growing? It's like he was actively trying to sabotage his own success. When you spend all your time playing politics instead of focusing on the product, this is what happens, Layla said, pulling up another screen showing employee retention rates. Half the talent he drove away is already asking about coming back. "Bring them back," I said without hesitation. "Anyone who left because of Carson's management style gets a clean slate and a fair interview." Already on it. She made a note on her tablet. "Speaking of clean slates, marketing wants to know what to do about Sienna." And there it was. The elephant in the room that everyone was too polite to mention directly. Sienna had taken a leave of absence the day after our fight, claiming she needed time to reassess her professional priorities. In corporate speak, that meant she was hiding in our house, alternating between crying, rage cleaning, and sending me text messages that I mostly ignored. What about her? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. She's good at her job, Layla said carefully. The team likes her, her campaigns are effective, and honestly, she never treated people the way Carson did. But everyone knows she's your wife, and they're all walking on eggshells wondering if she's going to get special treatment or if she's going to be collateral damage in whatever's happening between you two. I sank into one of the comfortable chairs Layla had installed, suddenly feeling every one of the sleepless nights I'd been having since the Christmas party. What do you think I should do? I think, Layla said, sitting across from me, that you should treat her the same way you'd treat any other employee. If she's good at her job, she stays. If she wants to come back, she comes back. What happens in your marriage is your business, but what happens in this company is everyone's business. Smart woman. This was exactly why I'd put her in charge. Fair enough, I said. Tell marketing that when Sienna's ready to come back, she'll be evaluated on her work, not her last name. Same standards as everyone else. Will do. Layla made another note, then looked up at me with that expression that meant she was about to say something I probably didn't want to hear. Can I ask you something personal? Shoot. Are you okay? And don't give me some corporate bullshit answer. You look like you haven't slept in weeks. I had to laugh at that. Here I was, finally living openly as a successful businessman instead of hiding in my basement like some kind of corporate vampire, and I probably looked worse than when everyone thought I was unemployed. Honestly, I don't know, I said. I spent 5 years being invisible, letting everyone think I was a failure, watching my own wife be embarrassed by me. Now I'm finally being myself, but I don't know if there's anything left to save in my marriage. You know what the difference is between you and Carson? Layla asked. Besides the fact that I'm not a complete asshole? She laughed. Carson destroyed things because he was insecure and needed to prove he was important. You're building things because you actually care about making them better. She gestured toward the window, where we could see employees collaborating in the break room, actually smiling while they worked. Look at this place. Look at what it's become in 3 weeks. You didn't fire Carson because you wanted revenge, though I'm sure that felt good. You fired him because he was hurting people. Your point. My point is that the same guy who saw potential in this company and saved it might want to think about whether there's potential in his marriage worth saving too. Before I could respond, her phone buzzed with what looked like an urgent message. The Cross Foundation launch event, she said, reading the screen. Your assistant wants to confirm the final headcount for tomorrow night. Right. The Cross Foundation. My attempt to do something meaningful with all the money I'd made over the years. Mentorship programs, scholarships, coding boot camps for kids who couldn't afford college. All the things I wished had existed when I was starting out. Tell them we're expecting 200, I said, standing up to leave. And Layla? Thanks for the advice. Anytime, boss. As I walked out of Stratos Tech that afternoon, I realized something had changed. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was building something instead of just tearing things down. The question was, what else was worth rebuilding? I almost didn't see her at first. The Cross Foundation launch event was in full swing. 200 people packed into the community center, mentors connecting with kids, scholarship recipients meeting their sponsors, the kind of organized chaos that happens when you put passionate people in a room together and let them change the world. Then I spotted her in the corner, wearing jeans and a simple sweater instead of her usual power suit, helping a teenage girl figure out how to set up her laptop for a coding workshop. Sienna. She'd been showing up to foundation events for the past 2 weeks, never making a big deal about it, never asking for recognition or trying to talk to me. She just helped. Quietly. The way she used to volunteer at the animal shelter when we first started dating, before corporate ambition turned her into someone who measured everything by quarterly reports and networking opportunities. I watched her explain something to the girl, probably basic Python syntax, knowing Sienna's background in digital marketing, and saw the kid's face light up when the code finally worked. That smile, that moment of pure joy when someone discovers they can create something from nothing, was exactly why I'd started the foundation in the first place. She's been here every day this week, said Marcus, my foundation director, appearing beside me with 2 cups of coffee. Doesn't make a fuss, doesn't try to take charge, just shows up and works. I noticed, I said, accepting the coffee gratefully. She cried yesterday, he continued, his voice gentle. During the mentorship session with the middle schoolers from downtown. One of the kids was talking about how his dad left when he found out about the scholarship, said he didn't want a charity case for his son. Sienna just broke down. I felt something twist in my chest. Not forgiveness, exactly. More like recognition. The woman helping that teenager wasn't the same woman who'd laughed at Carson's joke. This was someone I hadn't seen in years, the real Sienna, the one who'd gotten buried under designer clothes and corporate expectations. She asked me not to tell you she was here, Marcus added. But you're telling me anyway. He shrugged. Because I think you both forgot something important. You're not the only one who's been pretending to be someone else. As if she could feel me watching, Sienna looked up. Our eyes met across the room, and for a moment, neither of us moved. Then she turned back to the girl, but I'd seen something in her face. Vulnerability, maybe, or hope. I didn't go over to talk to her. We weren't ready for that yet. But I didn't look away either. Trust takes time to rebuild. Respect grows slowly. And forgiveness? That's the hardest part of all. But watching my wife help a stranger's kid discover her own potential, seeing her tears for a boy whose father couldn't see past his pride to love his son, that was a start. Maybe not a big start, but sometimes the smallest steps forward are the ones that matter most. 3 months. 3 months since Carson had called me a basement trophy and my world had turned upside down. Now here I was, walking into the exact same ballroom where it all started, except this time everything was different. The decorations were still over-the-top expensive, the champagne was still flowing like water, and the same crowd of corporate types was still trying to out-impress each other. But tonight wasn't Carson's show. Tonight was Stratos Tech's New Year celebration, and the guest of honor wasn't the man who'd been fired. It was the woman who'd replaced him. Ladies and gentlemen, Layla's voice carried clearly through the ballroom as she stood at the podium. I want to introduce someone who's been in the shadows too long. The man who saved this company when we didn't even know we needed saving. The man who believed in us when our former leadership didn't. The man who gave us all a second chance. I felt every eye in the room turn toward me as I made my way to the front. No more hiding in corners, no more being invisible. These people knew who I was now, knew what I'd done, knew that the quiet guy they'd ignored was the reason they all still had jobs. The applause wasn't polite corporate clapping. It was genuine, grateful, real. The kind of applause you get from people who actually respect you instead of just tolerating your presence. But my eyes weren't on the crowd. They were on Sienna, sitting quietly in the second row, wearing a simple black dress instead of her usual power suit. She wasn't trying to network or climb social ladders tonight. She was just there. When our eyes met, she started crying. Not the angry tears from our fight months ago, but something softer. Something that looked like understanding. She clapped along with everyone else, but her tears told the real story. She finally saw me. Not the man she'd thought she could manage or fix or be embarrassed by. The man I actually was. It had taken losing everything for us both to find out who we really were underneath all the pretending. The question now was whether that was enough to build something real. 6 months later, I'm sitting in my office, the real one upstairs, not the basement hideout, watching Sienna through the window as she teaches coding to a group of kids in our backyard. She's laughing at something one of them said, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing old jeans with grass stains on the knees. This is who she was before the corporate world convinced her she had to be someone else. This is who I fell in love with. We're not fixed. Hell, we're barely even okay most days. Marriage counseling twice a week, separate bedrooms, conversations that still end in tears more often than laughter. But we're trying. Actually trying. Instead of just pretending everything's fine while we slowly poison each other with resentment. Stratos Tech is thriving under Layla's leadership. Revenue's up 40%, employee satisfaction is through the roof, and we just opened offices in 3 new cities. The Cross Foundation has placed over 200 kids in mentorship programs and funded 50 full scholarships. Carson, last I heard, he was selling insurance in Phoenix and telling anyone who'd listen about the time he almost built a tech empire. The funny thing is, none of that matters as much as I thought it would. Don't get me wrong. I love seeing the company succeed, love watching kids discover they can code their way to better futures, Love knowing that Carson's learning what it feels like to be nobody special. But what I really love is living honestly. No more hiding who I am. No more pretending to be less than I am just to make other people comfortable. No more being anyone's basement trophy. I used to think the worst thing in the world was being invisible. Turns out the worst thing was being visible but completely misunderstood, even by the person who was supposed to know me best. Sienna looks up from the laptop she's sharing with a 10-year-old girl and catches me watching. She waves, smiles that real smile that made me marry her in the first place. I wave back. We're rebuilding. Slowly, carefully, honestly. Because I don't want to be loved for what I own. I want to be respected for who I am. They called me a trophy in the basement. Now I'm the architect of the house they all live in. I knew something wasn't right the moment I felt the stabbing pain in my side. It started as a dull ache earlier in the day, something I brushed off while I handled Grace's breakfast and prepped her for school. But by the afternoon, it became unbearable. I collapsed on the cold kitchen floor, clutching my side, the sharp waves of pain radiating through me. It felt like a knife twisting inside, and as much as I tried to mask it, I knew Grace, my 7-year-old daughter, could see through me. "Daddy, are you okay?" she asked, her tiny voice trembling as she stood a few feet away, her eyes wide with fear. She didn't dare move closer. Perhaps my winces scared her. I tried to reassure her, putting on the strongest voice I could muster, though it barely came out above a whisper. "I'll be okay, Grace. Just a little stomachache." My words were a lie, of course. Whatever this was, it wasn't just a simple stomachache. I was in agony, and the cold sweat beating on my forehead wasn't helping. I needed help. Amelia's footsteps echoed from down the hall. I felt a brief spark of hope. My wife would see me in this state and surely take action. She stepped into the kitchen, her sleek suitcase rolling behind her. She looked ready for her trip with her brother, Daniel, her hair perfectly styled, her expression showing not concern but annoyance. "What are you doing on the floor, Marcus?" she asked, her voice sharp, as if my crumpled form had somehow inconvenienced her. The pain made it hard to speak, but I managed to gasp out, "I think it's appendicitis. It's bad. I need to go to the hospital." Her response was a scoff. "Appendicitis? You're being dramatic. It's probably just indigestion. Why don't you rest for a bit? You'll feel better." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Did she not see me clutching my side, barely able to breathe through the waves of pain? "Amelia, please. I'm serious. I can't move. Grace is here. I need you." She glanced at her watch, the faintest flicker of impatience crossing her face. "Marcus, I don't have time for this. I can't miss my flight with Daniel. Just call Olivia or something. You'll figure it out." With that, she rolled her suitcase out of the kitchen and out of the house, leaving me there on the floor with Grace standing by, tears streaming down her face. "Daddy, don't be sick," she whimpered, finally rushing to my side and taking my hand in her small one. Her touch brought me comfort, but it also fueled my desperation. I couldn't let her see me like this for long. I had to do something. I fumbled for my phone with trembling hands, scrolling through my contacts until I found Olivia's name. My sister had always been there for me, and now, I had no choice but to lean on her again. When she picked up, her voice was a mix of confusion and concern. "Marcus? What's going on?" "Olivia," I rasped, the effort to speak draining me. "I think it's appendicitis. I can't move, and Grace is terrified. Amelia, she left. I need help." There was a brief silence on the other end before her voice came back, steady and firm. "Stay right there. I'm coming now. Just hold on." The relief I felt at her words was immense, but it was quickly overshadowed by a wave of anger and hurt. Amelia had abandoned me when I needed her the most. The woman I thought would always be my partner, my support, had chosen her trip over me, over Grace. As I leaned back against the cold tile, clutching Grace's hand while we waited for Olivia, one thing became clear. This wasn't something I could just forget or forgive. Amelia's decision to leave me in this state spoke louder than any argument we'd ever had. It wasn't just about the pain in my side anymore. It was about the fracture in our marriage, one I wasn't sure could ever be repaired. When Olivia arrived minutes later, rushing in and helping me to my feet, I felt a surge of gratitude for her. But even as she helped me into her car and drove us to the hospital, I couldn't shake the bitter truth Amelia's actions had revealed. I couldn't rely on her when it truly mattered. And that realization was a wound deeper than anything happening in my body. Lying in that hospital bed, staring at the sterile white walls and listening to the rhythmic beeping of the machines, I felt a strange mix of relief and anger. Relief because the surgery had been successful. My appendix had been on the verge of rupturing, the doctor said. If I had waited any longer, the situation could have been life-threatening. And anger because the person who should have been there for me, who should have rushed me to the hospital herself, wasn't. Amelia hadn't called. Not once. Not even to check if I was alive. My sister Olivia had stepped up without hesitation. She'd driven me to the hospital, stayed with Grace until my parents arrived, and even updated them on my condition while I was in surgery. She did everything Amelia should have done, but didn't. When I woke up, Olivia was there by my side, looking worried but relieved to see me awake. "You scared us, Marcus," she said softly, her hand resting on mine. I smiled weakly, the effort exhausting. "Thanks for being here, Olivia. I don't know what I would have done without you." She smiled back, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Don't thank me. This is what family does. I don't understand why Amelia didn't stay. I mean, Marcus, this is serious." "You could have," she stopped herself, shaking her head. "Never mind." Her words hung in the air long after she left the room. I knew what she wanted to say. I'd been thinking it myself. Amelia's absence wasn't just a moment of poor judgment. It was a betrayal. A betrayal of the vows we took, of the promises we made to always stand by each other. The doctor came in later to check on me, explaining how close I'd come to a major emergency. I nodded along, but I wasn't really listening. My mind was stuck on Amelia. I replayed the moment in the kitchen over and over, her dismissive words like daggers in my chest. When my parents arrived with Grace, her face lit up the moment she saw me. She ran to my bedside, climbing up carefully so she could sit beside me. "Daddy, are you all better now?" she asked, her little hands gripping mine tightly. I pulled her into a hug, holding her as tightly as I could manage. "I'm getting there, sweetheart. I'll be okay." Her presence was comforting, but it also reminded me of the responsibility I had. I couldn't let her grow up in an environment where she learned that neglect and indifference were acceptable. My parents stayed quiet, but their faces spoke volumes. My mom, always so reserved, looked like she wanted to say something. My dad, on the other hand, was fuming. "Marcus, where's Amelia? Why isn't she here?" he finally asked, his voice low and controlled, though I could sense the anger simmering beneath. I hesitated. "She's away, on a trip with Daniel." That was all it took for my dad to explode. "A trip? While you're in the hospital? Does she even know how close you came to?" "Dad, please," I interrupted, not wanting Grace to hear the argument brewing. "Let's not do this now." He looked like he wanted to argue, but my mom placed a hand on his arm, silently urging him to back down. The next few days were quiet. My parents took care of Grace while I recovered, and Olivia visited often to make sure I was okay. Amelia? Nothing. No calls, no texts, not a single sign of concern. I wanted to believe there was some explanation, some reason for her behavior. Maybe she was overwhelmed, or didn't understand how serious my condition was. But deep down, I knew the truth. She had made a choice that day, a choice to leave me and Grace behind for her own convenience. By the time I was discharged and back home, the physical pain had dulled, but the emotional wound remained raw. Seeing Grace's face light up when I walked through the door was the only thing that made me smile. "Daddy, you're back," she cried, running into my arms. "You're not sick anymore, right?" "I'm much better now," I said, holding her close. But even as I said it, I knew that better was a relative term. Physically, I was healing. Emotionally, I was unraveling. Amelia's absence during my time of need wasn't something I could just shrug off. It had left a mark, a deep cut that I couldn't ignore. As I tucked Grace into bed that night, I sat by her side, stroking her hair as she drifted off to sleep. I thought about the promises I had made to Amelia when we got married, about the family we were supposed to be building together. And then I thought about her suitcase rolling out of the kitchen, her dismissive words echoing in my ears. I didn't know what I was going to do yet, but one thing was clear. Something had to change. I couldn't keep living like this, half supported, half loved. Amelia had made her choice. Now, I had to figure out mine. By the time Amelia returned from her trip, I thought I had prepared myself for the conversation we were about to have. I thought I'd worked through the anger and disappointment, but the moment the front door banged open and her voice filled the house, all those emotions came flooding back. "Marcus, why didn't you pick us up yesterday? Daniel and I had to spend extra on a taxi and train fares," she yelled, her frustration echoing down the hall. I was in the living room with Grace, helping her color a picture she'd been working on. Amelia stormed in, her suitcase trailing behind her, Daniel right on her heels. Both of them looked indignant, as if I'd somehow wronged them. I stood up slowly, my body still recovering from the surgery. "Welcome back," I said, my voice cold and steady. "Must have been a tough trip." Amelia stopped in her tracks, her expression shifting to surprise at the tone in my voice. "What's with the attitude?" she demanded. I couldn't hold it back any longer. "Attitude? Amelia, while you were off enjoying your trip, I was in the hospital. I nearly died." My voice was calm, but the anger simmered just below the surface. Her eyes widened slightly, but she quickly recovered, brushing me off with a wave of her hand. "You're fine now, though, right? It couldn't have been that serious." I felt something snap inside me. "Not that serious? My appendix was about to rupture, Amelia. If it weren't for Olivia, I don't even know if I'd still be here." "And where were you?" "On a trip with your brother, acting like I don't even exist." Daniel, usually so smug and confident, shifted uncomfortably. "Hey man, don't bring me into this. I didn't know anything about." I cut him off with a glare. "You didn't know because she didn't care enough to tell you. You both abandoned me when I needed you the most." Amelia's face reddened. "You're being dramatic. You always make a big deal out of nothing." Before I could respond, the front door opened again. I turned to see Olivia walking in with my parents and Amelia's parents right behind her. I'd called them earlier, explaining everything, and they had all agreed to come. Now, as they filed into the room, the air grew heavy with tension. "What's everyone doing here?" Amelia asked, her voice faltering slightly as she took in the stern expressions on their faces. My dad was the first to speak. "We're here because Marcus told us what happened." "Amelia, how could you leave him like that? How could you leave your husband and your daughter alone when he was in so much pain?" Amelia looked around, clearly taken aback by the collective disappointment directed at her. I didn't know it was that serious," she said weakly. "That's not an excuse," Olivia snapped, her voice sharp. "You didn't even bother to check. You just left. And let's not pretend this is the first time you've put your own plans above your family." Daniel, who had been trying to stay out of the conversation, finally spoke up. "Look, maybe she made a mistake, but it's not like Marcus was dying." "Enough," my mom said firmly, cutting him off. "This isn't just about what happened this time. It's about a pattern of behavior. Amelia, you've been putting Marcus and Grace last for a long time now, and we're tired of watching it." Amelia's parents, who had been silent until now, looked at their daughter with a mix of sadness and disappointment. "Amelia," her mother began, "we raised you to take care of your family, to be there for them. What you did, it's not right." Amelia crossed her arms defensively, her gaze darting between everyone in the room. "So what? You're all just going to gang up on me now? I made a mistake, okay? It's not the end of the world." "It is for me," I said quietly, but firmly. The room fell silent as I met her gaze. "Because this isn't just about one mistake. It's about every time I've had to pick up the pieces while you prioritized your own wants over our family. It's about the fact that I can't trust you to be there when it really matters." Amelia opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. For once, she didn't have a quick retort or a dismissive comment. She just stood there, staring at me as the weight of my words sank in. The silence was broken by my dad, who turned to Amelia's parents. "You should talk to your daughter. Because if something doesn't change, I don't see how this marriage can survive." With that, the meeting ended. One by one, everyone left, their disappointment hanging in the air like a storm cloud. Amelia didn't say a word as she walked to the bedroom, slamming the door behind her. Daniel muttered something about heading home and left without another word. I sat back down with Grace, who had been quietly watching from the couch. She climbed into my lap and wrapped her arms around me. "It's okay, Daddy," she whispered. "I'm here." And in that moment, I realized she was the only person I could count on. Something had shifted, and there was no going back. Amelia's actions had pushed us to the edge, and now it was up to me to decide what came next. The days after the confrontation felt like walking through a fog. Amelia tried to act as if nothing had happened, but the silence between us was thick and oppressive. She avoided me, which was fine. I didn't have much to say to her. The damage was done, and there was no undoing it. I spent my time reflecting, replaying every moment of our marriage in my head. I thought about the times I had been there for her without hesitation, supporting her through every challenge, big or small. And then I thought about how she had walked out on me, dismissing my pain as if it were nothing, leaving Grace and me to fend for ourselves. It wasn't just one moment of neglect. It was the culmination of years of feeling like I came second, or even third, to her wants and her brother's demands. This wasn't a marriage anymore. It was a partnership in name only. One evening, as Grace was asleep and the house was quiet, I sat at the dining table with a folder in front of me. Inside were the divorce papers I had picked up earlier that day. I hadn't told anyone yet, not my parents, not Olivia, because I needed to be certain. Amelia walked into the room, her phone in hand, scrolling as if she didn't have a care in the world. When she saw me sitting there, she paused. "What's with this serious face, Marcus?" I looked up at her, my heart pounding in my chest. I had rehearsed this moment in my head, but now that it was here, I felt a lump forming in my throat. Still, I pushed through. "We need to talk." She sighed dramatically, setting her phone down on the counter. "What now? Can't we just move on from all this?" I slid the folder across the table toward her. "No, Amelia. We can't just move on. I've thought about this, and I can't do it anymore. I want a divorce." For a moment, her face froze in disbelief. Then she let out a laugh, cold, harsh, and mocking. "A divorce? Don't be ridiculous, Marcus. You're overreacting. You always do." I leaned forward, my hands resting on the table to steady myself. "This isn't an overreaction, Amelia. This is me finally standing up for myself and for Grace. You've made it clear where your priorities lie, and they're not with us. I can't keep living like this." Her expression shifted, anger replacing the mockery. "Oh, so you think you can manage without me? Do you have any idea how hard it'll be out there? You're not exactly rolling in money, Marcus." Her words were meant to wound, but I didn't flinch. I had anticipated this. I'd rather struggle every day than spend another moment feeling invisible in my own marriage. At least I'll know I'm doing it for Grace, not for someone who doesn't care. Amelia's eyes narrowed, her face twisting into a sneer. "Fine, go ahead. Divorce me. Let's see how well you do on your own. Don't come crawling back when you realize what a mistake you've made." Her arrogance only solidified my decision. "This isn't a mistake, Amelia. Staying would be the mistake. And for the record, I'm not crawling back. Not now, not ever." She stormed out of the room, slamming the bedroom door behind her. I stayed at the table for a long time, staring at the papers in front of me. Part of me felt relief. Finally, I was taking control of my life. But another part of me felt a deep sadness. This wasn't how I had envisioned my marriage ending, but it was the reality I had to face. The next morning, I filed the paperwork. It wasn't an easy process, but each signature, each document, felt like a step forward. My parents and Olivia were supportive, though I could see the sadness in their eyes. They had hoped for reconciliation, but they also understood why it wasn't possible. Amelia, on the other hand, was livid. She alternated between ignoring me completely and throwing snide comments my way whenever we crossed paths. "You think you're so noble, don't you?" she hissed one evening as I was helping Grace with her homework. I didn't respond. I didn't have to. My actions spoke louder than any argument we could have. For the first time in years, I felt like I was reclaiming my life. It wasn't easy, and there were moments of doubt and fear, but deep down, I knew I was doing the right thing. This wasn't just about me. It was about Grace. She deserved to grow up in a home where love and respect were the foundations, not resentment and neglect. Amelia had made her choice, and now I was making mine. This was the beginning of a new chapter, one where I could finally breathe, finally hope, and finally be the father Grace deserved. The road ahead was uncertain, but I was ready to face it, one step at a time. Filing for divorce was one thing. Dealing with the aftermath was something else entirely. The process itself was grueling, not just because of the legalities, but because of Amelia's relentless efforts to undermine me. She wasn't just angry. She was determined to make me regret my decision, and she wasn't pulling any punches. At first, she played the victim, painting me as the unreasonable one. Marcus just decided he couldn't handle being a husband anymore, she told our mutual friends, conveniently leaving out the part where she'd left me on the kitchen floor in agony. Some of them believed her, others didn't, but I couldn't afford to waste energy defending myself. My focus had to stay on Grace and our future. Amelia's tactics escalated quickly. She became dismissive during mediation meetings, shrugging off agreements and refusing to compromise on anything. "I want the house," she declared during one of the first sessions, her tone cold and final. "You can find somewhere else to live." I didn't argue. I wasn't about to fight for a house that no longer felt like a home. My priority was ensuring stability for Grace, not clinging to material things that had lost their meaning. But her next move was harder to stomach. "You're not fit to have full custody," Amelia announced during another meeting, her words sharp and calculated. "You can barely manage on your own, and Grace needs consistency." Her audacity stunned me. The same woman who had left me to fend for myself during a medical emergency was now questioning my ability to care for our daughter. "Amelia," I said, keeping my voice as steady as I could, "Grace needs someone who puts her first. That's never been you." The mediator tried to keep things civil, but it was clear that Amelia wasn't interested in resolution. She wanted to punish me. Every comment, every demand, was designed to push me to my breaking point. But I refused to give her the satisfaction. Instead, I leaned on the support system I'd always had, my parents, Olivia, and even a few close friends who saw through Amelia's facade. Olivia became my rock during this time, helping me navigate the legal maze and reminding me of why I was doing this. "Don't let her wear you down," she said one evening as we worked through paperwork at my kitchen table. "You're stronger than she thinks." I clung to those words during the hardest moments, like the day Amelia decided to involve Grace. "Daddy wants to take you away from me," she told her, tears streaming down her face in a performance worthy of an Oscar. Grace, confused and scared, came to me later that evening. "Daddy, is that true? Do you want me to live with you and not Mommy?" Kneeling in front of her, I held her hands and looked into her wide, innocent eyes. "Sweetheart, I want you to be happy and safe. That's all I've ever wanted. No matter what happens, I'll always be here for you." It wasn't easy watching Grace try to make sense of the situation, but I knew I had to remain patient and steady for her sake. The divorce wasn't just about ending a marriage. It was about creating a healthier, more stable life for my daughter. As the weeks turned into months, Amelia's facade began to crack. Her arrogance gave way to frustration as she realized I wasn't backing down. The community started to take notice, too. Stories of her neglect and selfishness began to circulate thanks to Olivia and a few well-placed conversations. Amelia had always cared about appearances, and now those appearances were crumbling. Despite everything, I stayed focused on moving forward. I found a smaller, cozier place for Grace and me, a rental that felt more like a fresh start than the house ever had. I also began building a routine that gave Grace the consistency she needed. School drop-offs, homework sessions, bedtime stories. These small moments became the foundation of our new life, a reminder of what I was fighting for. The legal process was exhausting, but each step felt like progress. Every signed document, every agreement reached, brought me closer to freedom. Amelia's attempts to intimidate me no longer had the power they once did. I could see her for who she really was, a woman desperate to control a situation that was slipping through her fingers. One day, during yet another heated meeting, Amelia leaned across the table and sneered, "You think you're winning, don't you? You think you're so noble. But let me tell you something, Marcus. You'll regret this. You're nothing without me. Her words stung, but I didn't let it show. Instead, I met her gaze and replied, I'd rather struggle every day than spend another moment in a marriage where I feel invisible. This isn't about winning, Amelia. It's about doing what's right for Grace and me. For the first time, I saw something flicker in her eyes. Fear, maybe, or the realization that she couldn't control me anymore. Whatever it was, it didn't last long. She quickly masked it with a scoff and leaned back in her chair, but I knew I'd struck a nerve. The divorce wasn't finalized yet, but I could feel the tide shifting. I was no longer the man who lay on the kitchen floor, desperate and powerless. I was reclaiming my life, one hard-fought step at a time. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in years, I felt like I was walking towards something better. The shift in Amelia's demeanor was subtle at first, small cracks in her confidence that were easy to miss. But as the weeks went by, those cracks widened, revealing the person beneath the polished facade. The community, our friends, and even her workplace were starting to see her for who she truly was, and she didn't like it. Word of our divorce had spread faster than I expected, though I wasn't surprised. People love gossip, and a divorce is always a hot topic. Olivia had been instrumental in setting the record straight whenever Amelia tried to twist the narrative. She didn't sugarcoat anything. She told anyone who asked how Amelia had abandoned me during a medical emergency and prioritized her own trip over her family. At first, Amelia brushed it off, convinced she could charm her way out of the situation. She'd been good at that for years, winning people over with her wit and charisma. But this time, it wasn't working. Her colleagues began to notice her irritability and short temper. Friends who once admired her started distancing themselves, their smiles becoming polite but strained. Amelia's brother, Daniel, wasn't faring much better. The two of them had always been thick as thieves, but even their bond was showing signs of strain. One evening, while picking Grace up from a playdate, I overheard them arguing outside his apartment. "You're the reason everything's falling apart," Daniel shouted, his voice loud enough for the entire block to hear. "Oh, don't you dare blame me," Amelia snapped back. "You were there too. Don't act like you're innocent in all this." The sound of their voices rising and falling was oddly satisfying. For years, they'd been a united front, always putting their plans and priorities above mine. Now, they were tearing each other apart. At the same time, Amelia's professional life was unraveling. She'd always been proud of her job, boasting about her achievements and her ability to balance work and family. But the truth was, her neglectful behavior at home was starting to bleed into her work. Deadlines were missed, meetings were forgotten, and her once impeccable reputation began to crumble. One of her colleagues, who happened to be an old friend of mine, confided in me over coffee one afternoon. "Marcus, I don't know what's going on with Amelia, but she's not the same person she used to be. People are starting to talk. It's not good." I wasn't surprised, but hearing it confirmed felt like vindication. Amelia had built her identity around being successful and admired, but now, that image was falling apart. Meanwhile, I focused on rebuilding my life. Grace and I settled into our new routine, and though it wasn't always easy, there was a sense of peace in our home that hadn't been there in years. Grace seemed happier too, her laughter more frequent, her smiles brighter. One day, while dropping her off at school, I noticed a group of parents whispering nearby. I caught snippets of their conversation. My name, Amelia's name, words like abandoned and divorce. I could feel their eyes on me as I walked Grace to her classroom. It stung, but not as much as I thought it would. Let them talk, I told myself. They didn't know the full story, and even if they did, their opinions didn't matter. What mattered was Grace and the life I was building for us. Amelia, on the other hand, wasn't handling the judgment as well. She'd always cared deeply about what people thought of her, and now, she couldn't escape the whispers and side glances. Her once loyal friends were avoiding her, and even her parents seemed distant. One evening, while Grace was at Olivia's house, I drove past Amelia's place and saw her and Daniel arguing again, this time in the driveway. Their voices were muffled, but their body language said it all: accusations, frustration, blame. The two people who had once been so united were now at each other's throats, each trying to shift responsibility for the mess they'd created. The following week, I heard through the grapevine that Amelia had been demoted at work. Her boss had apparently grown tired of her declining performance and decided it was time for a change. For someone like Amelia, whose identity was so tied to her career, it was a devastating blow. I didn't feel sorry for her. Not anymore. She had made her choices, and now she was facing the consequences. The final nail in the coffin came during a school event. Grace's teacher had invited parents to join a small celebration in the classroom. Amelia showed up late, looking frazzled and out of place. When she tried to engage with the other parents, they offered her polite smiles but quickly moved on. I stood near the back, watching as she realized the warmth and admiration she'd once received were gone. She caught my eye, her expression a mix of anger and sadness, but I didn't look away. I wanted her to see that I wasn't the same man she had dismissed and belittled. As Grace and I walked out together, she hugged my leg and looked up at me. "Daddy, I'm glad you were here," she said with a bright smile. "I'll always be here, sweetheart," I replied, lifting her into my arms. Amelia had spent years tearing me down, but now, she was the one crumbling. And though I wasn't one to celebrate someone's downfall, I couldn't deny the sense of justice in seeing her finally face the consequences of her actions. She had made her choices, and now, so had I. The first morning in our new place felt surreal. The house was smaller, cozier, but it already felt more like a home than the one I'd left behind. Grace was still asleep, curled up in her new bed, while I stood in the kitchen, sipping coffee and looking around. The silence was different here, not oppressive like before, but peaceful. It was the sound of a fresh start. Rebuilding my life after the divorce wasn't easy. I had to let go of the anger, the resentment, and the frustration that had built up over the years. I had to focus on what mattered most, Grace. She was my anchor, the one constant in all this chaos, and I was determined to give her the stability she deserved. The first big step was finding a job. I'd been out of the workforce for years, relying on Amelia's income while I focused on raising Grace. Now, I had to step up. My resume wasn't exactly impressive. It had gaps that couldn't be ignored, but I was willing to work hard and prove myself. After weeks of searching and countless interviews, I landed a position at a small accounting firm. The owner, Clara, was a single mother herself, and she understood the challenges I was facing. "We'll take it one step at a time," she said during my final interview. "You'll find your rhythm, and we'll be here to support you." The job wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, and the environment was welcoming. I worked hard, learning as much as I could, and over time, I started to feel confident again. I wasn't just surviving. I was building something meaningful for Grace and me. Grace, for her part, adapted quicker than I expected. She loved our new neighborhood, especially the park just a block away. She made friends easily, her laughter filling the air as she played on the swings or chased butterflies. Seeing her happy reminded me why I was doing all this. One evening, as we sat on the living room floor eating pizza, Grace looked up at me and said, "Daddy, I like it here. It feels like home." Her words brought tears to my eyes. I leaned over and kissed her forehead. "I'm glad, sweetheart. This is our home now." Of course, not everything was perfect. The whispers and gossip in the community hadn't stopped. At school drop-offs and pickups, I could feel the judgmental stares and hear the hushed conversations. "That's Marcus," they'd say. "You know, the one who got divorced. His wife left him." It hurt, but I refused to let it affect me. Grace needed me to be strong, and I wasn't about to let small-minded people bring me down. Olivia, as always, was my biggest cheerleader. She'd call me after hearing some new rumor and laugh it off. "Let them talk," she'd say. "You're doing great, and that's all that matters." Amelia's downfall continued, though I tried not to dwell on it. I heard from mutual acquaintances that her workplace had demoted her, and she was struggling to maintain the lifestyle she'd once flaunted. Daniel had distanced himself from her, and even her parents were less involved in her life. She was becoming a shadow of the person she once was. One day, while picking Grace up from school, Amelia showed up. She looked worn out, her usual polished appearance replaced with tired eyes and a forced smile. Grace ran to me first, hugging me tightly before turning to her mother. "Hi, Mommy," she said hesitantly. Amelia knelt down and hugged her, but the interaction felt strained. She glanced at me, her expression unreadable. "Marcus, can we talk?" she asked quietly. I nodded, stepping to the side while Grace played nearby. "What's on your mind?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. She hesitated, looking down at her hands. I wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything." The words caught me off guard. Amelia wasn't one to admit fault, let alone apologize. But as much as I wanted to hear those words years ago, now they felt hollow. Too little, too late. "I appreciate that," I said, my voice steady. "But things are different now. Grace and I are moving forward, and I need to focus on that." She nodded, her shoulders slumping slightly. "I understand." As she walked away, I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, sadness, and closure. For the first time, I truly felt like I was leaving the past behind. In the weeks that followed, life settled into a new rhythm. Work became more fulfilling as I grew in my role, and Grace thrived in her new environment. Our home was filled with laughter and love, a stark contrast to the tension and neglect we'd left behind. One evening, as I sat by the window watching Grace play in the yard, I reflected on how far we'd come. The road had been tough, filled with pain and uncertainty, but it had led us here, a place of peace and hope. I wasn't the same man I'd been when this journey began. I was stronger, more confident, and finally free to build the life Grace and I deserved. Rebuilding a life from the ground up isn't easy, but it's worth it. And as I watched Grace's laughter fill the air, I knew I'd made the right choice. We were finally home. The quiet of the evening was something I hadn't realized I missed until it became a regular part of my life. Grace was asleep in her room, her soft breathing the only sound in the house. I sat by the window, a cup of coffee in my hands, staring out at the stars. The past few months had been a whirlwind of emotions, challenges, and change, but sitting there in the stillness, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. I thought back to where it all started: the cold kitchen floor, the pain ripping through my body, and the realization that Amelia wasn't coming back to help me. That moment had been a wake-up call, forcing me to see the truth I'd been ignoring for years. Our marriage had been crumbling for a long time, but I'd convinced myself that things would get better. They never did. It wasn't just about Amelia leaving me in that moment of need. It was about the countless other times she prioritized herself, her brother, or her career over our family. It was about the dismissive remarks, the indifference, and the way I always felt like an afterthought. I had spent so much time trying to hold everything together that I hadn't realized how much of myself I'd lost in the process. But now, sitting here in this small, cozy home with Grace sleeping peacefully in the next room, I realized how far I'd come. I wasn't the man who had begged for scraps of attention or understanding. I wasn't the man who had settled for being invisible in his own marriage. I was someone new, someone stronger. The road to this point hadn't been easy. The divorce proceedings had been brutal, with Amelia fighting me every step of the way. She had tried to tear me down, questioning my ability to parent Grace, mocking my decision to leave her, and spreading lies to anyone who would listen. But through it all, I held firm. Not because it was easy, but because I knew what I was fighting for: a better life for Grace and me. And now, here we were, living that better life. It wasn't perfect. There were still whispers and judgment from the community, and there were days when the weight of it all felt like too much. But every time I saw Grace's smile, heard her laugh, or watched her thrive in our new environment, I knew I'd made the right choice. Reflecting on Amelia's downfall, I couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication. She had always been so sure of herself, so convinced that she was untouchable. But the cracks in her facade had been exposed, and now she was the one struggling to keep up appearances. I didn't revel in her pain, but I couldn't deny the satisfaction of seeing her face the consequences of her actions. Still, this wasn't about her anymore. It was about me, about Grace, and about the life we were building together. I thought about all the little victories we'd had in the past few months: Grace making new friends at school, my first paycheck from my new job, the nights we spent curled up on the couch watching movies. These moments, as small as they seemed, were everything. They were proof that we could move forward, that we could find happiness and stability on our own. As I sat there, I felt a wave of gratitude wash over me. For Olivia, who had been my rock through all of this. For my parents, who had stepped in when I needed them the most. For Grace, whose resilience and joy reminded me of why I was fighting so hard. And even for myself, for finding the strength to leave a toxic situation and start over. I took a deep breath, letting the cool night air fill my lungs. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, that didn't scare me. If I could survive everything I'd been through, Amelia's betrayal, the grueling divorce, the whispers and judgment, I could handle whatever came next. The sound of Grace stirring in her room pulled me out of my thoughts. I set my coffee cup down and walked to her door, peeking inside. She was still asleep, her face peaceful and her tiny hand clutching the edge of her blanket. I smiled, my heart swelling with love and determination. This was what mattered. Not the past, not the whispers, not Amelia's attempts to tear me down. Grace was my priority, and everything I did from here on out would be for her. She deserved a father who was present, loving, and strong. And I was determined to be that father. As I turned off the light and closed her door, I felt a sense of closure. The chapter with Amelia was over, and a new one was beginning. It was a chapter one would write on my own terms, filled with hope, love, and resilience. The road ahead might still have challenges, but I was ready to face them. For the first time in years, I felt like I was in control of my own story. And this time, I was determined to make it a good one. It started with a knock at the door late one afternoon. I wasn't expecting anyone, and Grace was at Olivia's house for the weekend, giving me a rare moment of peace. I opened the door, and there she was, Amelia. For a moment, I was stunned. She looked nothing like the woman I had once married. Her usual confident demeanor was gone, replaced by slumped shoulders and tired eyes. "Marcus," she began, her voice quieter than I had ever heard it. "Can we talk?" I hesitated, unsure of what to do. Part of me wanted to close the door in her face and be done with it, but another part of me, the part that once loved her, wanted to hear her out. Against my better judgment, I stepped aside and let her in. Amelia walked into the living room, glancing around as if seeing it for the first time. The simplicity of the space seemed to throw her off, but I didn't offer any explanation. I stayed standing, waiting for her to speak. She finally turned to face me, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "I've been thinking a lot about everything that's happened," she started, her voice trembling slightly, "and I realized I owe you an apology. For everything." I crossed my arms, keeping my expression neutral. "What exactly are you apologizing for, Amelia?" She swallowed hard, looking down at the floor. "For abandoning you when you needed me. For not being the wife or partner you deserved. For putting my own needs first. I was selfish, Marcus, and I see that now." Her words hung in the air, but they didn't have the impact she probably thought they would. Months ago, I might have clung to them, desperate for her to finally acknowledge the pain she caused. But now, they felt hollow. Too late, too rehearsed. "Why now?" I asked, my tone steady. "Why are you apologizing now, Amelia? Because you've truly changed? Or because you've realized the life you built is falling apart?" She flinched, my words clearly hitting their mark. "It's not like that," she said quickly, but the hesitation in her voice betrayed her. I miss us. I miss what we had." I shook my head, letting out a bitter laugh. "What we had? Amelia, we haven't had anything real in years. You made sure of that every time you dismissed me, every time you put yourself and Daniel above Grace and me." She took a step closer, her eyes pleading. "I know I messed up, Marcus, but I want to make things right. For Grace. For us." I could feel my anger rising, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Make things right?" I repeated. "Amelia, you can't just walk back into my life and expect everything to go back to the way it was. You didn't just mess up, you broke something. And I've spent the last few months picking up the pieces and building something better for Grace and me." Tears filled her eyes, but I didn't feel the sympathy I once would have. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness," she said, her voice cracking, "but I'm asking for another chance. Please, Marcus. For a moment, I considered her words. Not because I wanted to take her back, but because I wanted to be sure of my decision. This was a woman I had once loved, the mother of my child. But as I stood there, staring at her tear-streaked face, I realized that whatever love I had for her was gone. It had been replaced by something stronger, self-respect. "I'm sorry, Amelia," I said, my voice firm but not unkind. "But I've moved on. Grace and I have found a life that works for us, and I'm not willing to jeopardize that. You made your choices, and now I'm making mine." Her shoulders sagged, and for the first time, she seemed to accept that she wasn't going to get the response she wanted. "I understand," she whispered, wiping at her eyes. I'm sorry, Marcus, for everything." "Thank you," I said simply. "I hope you can find peace with yourself, Amelia. But this is the end of the road for us." She nodded slowly, her gaze lingering on me for a moment before she turned and walked out the door. I closed it behind her, leaning against it for a moment as I took a deep breath. The emotions were there: anger, sadness, even a small flicker of pity, but they didn't consume me. Instead, I felt a sense of closure. This chapter of my life, with all its pain and heartache, was finally over. When Grace came home later that evening, her laughter filled the house as she told me about the adventures she had with Olivia. I listened intently, my heart full as I realized just how far we had come. Amelia's attempt at reconciliation was a reminder of the past, but it didn't define our future. Grace and I were moving forward, step by step, into a life that was brighter and stronger than anything I could have imagined. Amelia had been a part of my story, but now, I was the one writing the next chapter, and I wasn't looking back.